Good afternoon and welcome to this session on spectral signatures and image interpretation. For the next 1 hour, we will be discussing about how to interpret images and look at the characteristic features in terms of signatures that will help us identify land cover features on remotely sensed data. So by now you are already familiar with the process of remote sensing. Just to summarize, we know that now for the process of remote sensing, we need a source of energy. The sun being a free and most commonly available source of energy is one of the most commonly used energy sources, and we use the electromagnetic radiations from the sun which travel through the atmosphere and interact while they travel through this atmospheric cover. They interact with the constituents of the atmosphere like gases, water molecules, smoke, fog, anything that they encounter. After this interaction, they reach the target of interest, that is the surface of the earth, and interact with features like built-up features or vegetation. And then after this interaction, energy that is reflected towards the sensor travels a second time through the atmosphere, again interacting with the constituents of the atmosphere. So there is a two-time interaction with the atmospheric constituents. The energy that reaches the sensor is recorded in a digital. The signal is recorded at the sensor. It is then transmitted to ground receiving stations, pre-processed for the removal of errors, and then supplied to users for interpretation purposes for different kinds of applications. Before we start interpreting, we also need to be familiar with the properties of the electromagnetic spectrum. I'm sure you now know that the spectrum ranges from shorter wavelengths, which include the X-rays, gamma rays, ultraviolet rays, to the longer waves like the radio waves and the microwaves, radio waves which are used for communication, and the visible infrared and microwave regions which are used for remote sensing purposes. So all these several regions of the electromagnetic spectrum are useful for remote sensing. In different regions, different properties of land cover features can be seen and interpreted, and then we can do analysis based on that. So we can say that the analysis of remote sensing images will involve the identification of different targets. The different targets would mean different features in the image. Different targets would mean a feature of interest. So it could be a built-up feature, it could be a vegetation feature, it could be a water feature, and so on. Now, targets are defined in terms of the way they reflect or emit radiation. This means that the amount of radiation or energy reflected back or emitted towards the sensor after the interactions within the atmosphere and with the target, the amount of energy that reaches the sensor is recorded there, and this is what we see in the form of an image. So this would mean that if a feature, say a water feature, reflects more energy in a particular wavelength band, then we will see a bright feature in the image, a bright signature on the image, and vice versa. If it happens to absorb more in that region of the spectrum, then we will see a dark signature on the image. Usually we see gray signatures all around, and different kinds of targets will reflect or emit in different ways in different regions of the spectrum. So as an interpreter, we need to be aware of the characteristics of the electromagnetic spectrum and how land cover classes will behave when these radiations interact with them, and we see this product in the form of a image or a photograph. So to summarize, we can say that the act of examining images to identify objects or to judge their significance and see the relationship that they have with surrounding features, how surrounding features affect. So this would be an information extraction process from the images. And when we do a visual analysis for information extraction, this would involve a considerable amount of subjective judgment. Right? It is not an objective process like a mathematical process. Each interpreter would have, according to his training and his background, the judgment will be affected. Unlike a mathematical process where, it's going to be an objective result. Now, interpreter would be defined as a specialist who is trained in the study of photographs or images, in addition to being an expert in his or her own discipline. So, for example, it could be a geologist who uses these images for interpreting geological features like, say, lineaments, or study earthquakes, or maybe study mineral, where minerals can be found, and so on and so forth. Then a little bit about the digital image. The image is a pictorial representation of an object or a scene, and this can be either in the analog form, that is the hard copy format. You take a printout and you manually interpret features, or it could be a digital image. Now, a digital image is made up of squares or rectangular areas called pixels. So as you can see here, it is made up of rows and columns, and this results in square or rectangular areas, which we call picture elements or pixels. Each of these picture elements or pixels is associated with a pixel value, a numerical value. This value is known as the digital number, or the brightness value, or the spectral value, and this denotes the amount of energy reflected from the ground from this area. So all the features that are there in this area, the amount of energy that they reflect is recorded in the form of a number. Now, since we have the sensors are capable of acquiring images in multiple bands, so each band or channel corresponds to one region or a particular region range of the electromagnetic spectrum. So as you can see here, we have the red wavelength corresponding to the red band, the green band, the blue band, and the infrared band. This is an example of a multispectral image. And each pixel, even though it would correspond to the same area on the ground, that is geographically, it will have the same coordinates, because the electromagnetic radiation range is changing, that is each band, band 1, band 2, band 3, and so on, will have different, will correspond to different regions of the spectrum. Depending upon which region of the spectrum we are sensing in, this pixel value will be changing. Okay? Then, since we have multiple bands, while displaying on screen, on the digital screen, we know that the hardware for display systems will have only 3 color guns, that is the primary colors, red, green, and blue. So at one instance of time, we will be able to see or visualize or display only 3 bands, even though the image may consist of more bands. So we need to choose the most appropriate bands for our application. Now, the most appropriate bands will be those which display my feature of interest or the user's feature of interest in the best possible visual manner. So, to be able to extract maximum amount of information from that band combination. If I display the red channel through the red color gun, the green through the green, and the blue through the blue, what I see on screen is called a true color composite. A true color composite meaning that I see exactly the same colors in the objects as they are found on the ground or on the terrain. So that, therefore, it is called a natural color composite or a true color composite. However, I may be missing out crucial information in terms of electromagnetic bands because I will be able to see physically only 3 bands at a time. As soon as I change this true color combination and include, say, the infrared band, I visualize the infrared band through the red band, the red through the green, and the green through the blue, then it will be called a false color composite, FCC. I am not in any way restricted to using only a particular band combination. I can use any band combination, as I said earlier. The choice of bands for the combination will be dependent upon the feature that I'm interested in. So if I'm interested in water features, I will choose a band combination which displays these features in the best possible way, that is in the best possible contrast, etc., so that the interpreter is able to extract maximum amount of information related to this feature. Now, why is it that for interpreting images or photographs or identifying features like buildings or roads or trees or railway lines, etc., we need to have special training? And why is it difficult, if at all? Then, because we are used to interpreting or looking at photographs and identifying features in everyday life as well. There are a few points here. So what happens is that in everyday life, we are used to seeing in 3 dimensions, that is stereoscopically. However, we lose our sense of depth when viewing a 2-dimensional image. Now, so we need to simulate the 3rd dimension of height. So usually when we do image interpretation, we use a single image, and therefore we see things in 2 dimensions. Then in everyday viewing or visualization of objects, the viewing direction or perspective that we are familiar with is a horizontal perspective, whereas the objects that we see on the image have been taken with a vertical camera axis or a vertical perspective. So one needs to, when we are interpreting these images, we need to be able to imagine how these things would look like if they are seen from a vertical perspective. That is, if you see only the tops of the objects. So you can imagine a situation, suppose you were sitting physically in a class and a camera was mounted on the rooftop and a picture was clicked of the tops of your heads, and that was distributed and you were asked to identify all your classmates. So that would have been difficult if you did not see the facial features. So it's a similar situation wherein we need to imagine how things would look like if viewed from only the vertical perspective, and therefore the most familiar things also at times might become unfamiliar. So this kind of, getting used to being able to imagine that situation is required. Then combining an unfamiliar perspective with a very different scale and lack of recognizable details can also make very familiar objects that we see every day unfamiliar in the image. Then finally, as human beings, we are used to seeing or visualizing only the visible wavelengths, that is violet, indigo, blue, green, yellow, orange, and red. This is the wavelength band that human eyes are sensitive to and are able to see through. We are not able to see in the infrared band or the ultraviolet band or the microwave region, etc. So imaging of wavelengths outside of this window, that is the visible wavelength, is difficult for us to comprehend or understand. So even if, suppose I click a picture of something very familiar, like a building that you see every day or a person that you meet every day, say using the infrared wavelength or an infrared camera, then you might not be able to recognize that feature very easily. So one needs to be made used to and understand the properties of the electromagnetic spectrum and how they would behave when they interact with different features. So that is what is the task of the interpreter. Then there are certain data characteristics, that is, you have already been made familiar with this, but they are very, very important in terms of for the interpreter to be able to choose optimum kind of data which is suitable for the kind of application that you wish to use the image for. Now, since there is a plethora of data available, we need to be sure which kind of data and which characteristics of the data will be most useful for our application. And so we need to be familiar with these data characteristics. So spectral resolution tells us which part of the electromagnetic spectrum has been measured and what is the bandwidth, how narrow the bands are, what is the narrowness of the regions of the electromagnetic channels that the image is composed of. So if it is an application which requires the interpreter to interpret features or see differences in terms of very similar characteristics, like say two vegetation species or two minerals, right? So they will have similar characteristics. Therefore, a very fine spectral resolution will be required for the interpreter to be able to make a difference or to be able to identify them correctly using the image. Radiometric resolution is the sensitivity of the sensor in terms of the smallest differences in energy that can be measured. So it is the quantization level of the image or the data. That is, how many number of grayscales or color can the sensor sense. So if two adjacent pixels emit similar amounts of energy, is the sensor sensitive to measuring that difference? This translates into radiometric resolution. So if, for example, if I have a 7-bit image, so the 7-bit quantization will mean that my pixel values or DN values in the image will range from 0 to 127, that is 2 to the power 7, 128 number of grayscales. That many number of colors or gray shades are distinguishable in that image data. Similarly, 8-bit data or 8-bit quantized images the DN values would range from 0 to 255, that is 2 to the power 8, and we will be able to distinguish, we should be able to distinguish 256 number of grayscales, gray levels, or colors in this image, which will mean that lower values will be dark and higher values will be brighter, and usually it ranges in the gray regions. Spatial resolution tells us about the smallest unit area that is measurable on the image, that is the size of the pixel. So if I say I have an image with 5-meter spatial resolution, it means that the size of the pixel is 5 meters by 5 meters or 5 meters by 5 meters. This would mean that two objects can be distinguished separately on this image if and only if they are at least separated at least by a distance of 5 meters, right? If it happens that there are two trees which are say 4 meters apart, they will fall within the pixel and we will not be able to see them as two different entities. So spatial resolution translates into the amount of detail that a interpreter is able to see on the image. So if we need to see higher amount of detail, greater amount of detail, that is, if I need to see individual buildings, individual roads, etc., tree canopies have to be digitized, etc., or individual vehicle details have to be taken out from the image, so on and so forth. So the user or the interpreter will require a higher spatial resolution data. Temporal resolution or revisit means the time between two successive image acquisitions over the same area. So this is temporal resolution, and if I have temporally varying images, then we can do change detection analysis. So change over a period of time can be assessed. If forest areas are changing into urban areas or agriculture areas, or how much is the urban sprawl, say in the 1960s or the 70s, how much was the urban area, and then in the 1980s, did it increase or decrease, and so on and so forth. Or maybe if there has been an event like an earthquake or a tsunami or a landslide, then if we compare pre-event images and post-event images, we can see where there is damage, which are the areas which need emergence and which need to, at a priority, they need to be attended to, which are the roads or that can be taken to reach people in need most quickly, and so on and so forth. So change detection studies can be done using temporally varying data. Now, the advantages are, of course, you are already aware that these kind of images, over ground observation, that these kind of images give us synoptic view. They are a permanent record, so we can go back in time and see what was the situation earlier and compare with what it is now. We are able to see in different spectral regions. Images also provide us data at different levels of detail, that is different spatial resolutions. It also gives us stereoscopic view, that is, if I use stereoscopic data, I can generate elevation models and see things in 3 dimensions. And in the long run, it comes out to be more cost and time effective. Now we come to the next section, which is the spectral signature. What is a spectral signature and how is it useful in image interpretation? Now, the task of the interpreter is to identify pixel values and relate them to land cover classes. How do you do that? How do you identify this? A signature is something which gives an object or piece of information its identity. So if you go to the bank, yes, you need to put your signature, and it is compared to the signature that is kept in the bank in the library. Yes. So if it's a match, then you are able to do your transaction. Similarly, you can use your fingerprint or your iris as an identification for identification purposes. So characteristic features which form key to enable an object to be identified is called a signature. Right? Now, spectral, spatial, temporal, and polarization variations which facilitate discrimination of features on remotely sensed data can be used as signatures. Now, how do we use spectral values for signatures? What is done is that a spectral reflectance curve is plotted. This curve is a graph or a plot of wavelength regions on one axis and percentage or amount of reflectance or amount of energy that is reflected on the other axis. So the curve would be a graph of the spectral reflectance of an object as a function of its wavelength. And this helps us in choosing the wavelength region for remotely sensed data acquisition for certain applications. Now, if you see here, you will see that this curve corresponds to water. But the physical condition of the feature, that is water, is clear water. So if due to any reason this physical condition changes, then this curve is also going to depict some changes. And this is how the interpreter is going to extract information related to this feature from the image. Now, if you look at this curve, what do we interpret? That from point 4, from here, that is the visible region, it reflects, the percentage reflectance is very low. That is, it is a very dark feature. It's a dark feature. It reflects only about less than 5% of the energy in the visible portion. By the time it reaches the infrared region, all of its energy is absorbed. So clear water in the infrared region will give us a very dark response or signal or signature. So when we see clear water in the infrared band of the image, it will be a dark feature. Similarly, if we look at vegetation, now the physical condition of the vegetation is green. So healthy green vegetation will depict this curve. So if you see here, there is a dip which corresponds to absorption. Then there is a steep rise in the infrared, right from the red up. here. So there is a steep rise. So infrared region, if the infrared region is used for imaging vegetation, on such an image, the vegetation features will be seen as a very bright feature. Water, as we saw in the infrared region, would give us a very dark signature. Vegetation, on the other hand, would give us a very bright signature. Then there is a plateau. In this region, there is a plateau, and then we see one dip, which is what corresponds to water absorption at 1.4 micrometers, and another one at 1.9 micrometers. So this, if these change, it will indicate that the plant or the vegetation is stressed, is water stressed. So there is some stress due to less water in the plant cell. So what we need to remember here is that the physical condition of the object is what dictates how it will look like in that region. The feature will look like in the wavelength band that we are considering. So if the physical condition changes, the manifestation of the signature on the image is also going to change. Okay. So spectral responses that are measured by remote sensing sensors over various features, and we need to study the reflectance and spectral emittance curves and the variability of the spectral signature. Now, we will quickly go through different spectrals and the spectral signatures for different Landcover features, beginning with vegetation. We just saw the vegetation curve. Now, the general characteristic of vegetation is its green color caused by the chlorophyll pigment in the plant cell. So if the presence of chlorophyll is somehow affected, it could be due to disease, or it could be due to less water, or the plant could be naturally not green. Some plants don't have green leaves. So this characteristic curve is then going to change. Then thickness of the leaf is going to also, the physical characteristic, leaf thickness will also have an effect on how much amount of energy is reflected. So thick leaves are going to reflect differently, and thin leaves will reflect differently. So you can see in the curve here how the curve shape changes. Then the shape of the leaf. So whether it is a needle-shaped leaf or whether it is a broad-shaped leaf, broad leaf like in the deciduous forest. Needle-shaped leaves will be there in coniferous forest. So the amount of reflection is significantly less in needle leaf tree canopies as compared to broadleaf canopies, that is the deciduous forest. Also the growth stage. So immature plants contain less amount of chlorophyll and fewer air voids than older leaves. So as the plant grows, they will reflect more visible light and less infrared radiation. So the old and the new, the stage of maturity or growth of the plant can also be studied using these spectral signatures or the clues that we see on the image. Then if plants are diseased, right, they will then not have them, the leaves might become yellow or brown and curl up, and the infected plants can be differentiated from the healthy ones by observing the spectral reflectance curve, because the amount of chlorophyll here will decrease. So the physical condition again changes, and the spectral reflectance curve will be affected accordingly. Okay. Now you can spend time later when we share these slides with you, solving this little question. Then we come to soil. Similarly, the characteristics of the spectral reflectance curve of soil are affected by moisture content. That is, wet soil generally appears darker. So increasing soil moisture will soil moisture will lower spectral reflectance, right? Then organic content. So soil with more organic content usually appears darker in color. So less decomposed organic material will have higher reflectance, right? Iron content also affects the amount of reflectance. Then the structure or texture of soil. That is, this will affect if it's a clay soil or a sandy soil, the ability to store moisture, water. So clay soils will tend to retain moisture, and sandy soils, the moisture will percolate through. So low moisture contents, sandy soils will have low moisture content and therefore fairly high spectral reflectance properties. Then we come to the spectral signature for water. Now reflect. This will also be affected. The water bodies will reflect, different physical features will be affected. So whether the depth of water is shallow or deep. So when we observe, near the coast, then the suspended material will also contribute to the reflectance. Therefore, we will see slight, if you had observed in the spectral reflectance curve, we had seen that in the visible portion, it showed some amount of reflectance, even though very less. So in the shallow regions, if water depth is shallow, there will be some amount of reflectance due to suspended material like sand, etc. Also, if there is algal content or phytoplankton content on the surface, then this will also give us some reflectance in terms of, green, if it is green algae or if it is blue algae or brown algae and so on and so forth. Then surface roughness. Surface roughness will also affect the amount of reflectance from the water surface. Let us see. So water in the visible wavelengths of the electromagnetic radiation, very little light is absorbed. So a small amount, usually below 5%, we saw that in the curve, is reflected and the rest of it is transmitted. So it is gray reflected, gray signature that we see. So you see here. Then water absorbs strongly in the infrared region, both the near infrared and the mid infrared region, leaving little radiation to be reflected or transmitted. So you can see that here. So very little energy reaches back, almost none. So this results in a sharp contrast between any water and land boundaries. So the land-water boundary can be easily distinguished or marked. Then we come to what are the factors that govern spectral reflectance of snow. The grain size, and this lets the interpreter make an assessment of the age of the snow feature. So reflectance falls at wavelengths, decreases, that is, at all the wavelengths as grain size increases. So when grain size becomes larger, the reflectance is less. So this helps the interpreter in assessing the age of the snow, right? Whether it was recent snowfall or whether the snow has been there for some considerable time. This can be assessed. Then snowpack thickness. How thick is the snow? How compact is it? So reflectance of snow will decrease as it ages. So as it becomes more compact, when it is fresh snow, it is not so compact. It is fresh and fluffy. So here the age again can be assessed and seen on the image and interpreted accordingly. Then liquid water content. So if the snow starts melting, water content is going to increase, and therefore we analyze that this will reduce reflectance. Snow, when we will see some images, you will see that snow reflects a large amount of energy. Therefore, we see snow as a bright white feature on the image. However, when it starts melting and liquid water content increases there, then therefore we have already seen that water tends to absorb in the infrared region, so it will then reduce reflectance. If the infrared band is there, then definitely we will see darker signatures on the image. Also, whether contaminants or pollutants are present, if they are, then like soot particles or ash, etc., then these are the contaminants or pollutants also reduce snow reflection in the visible portion of the spectrum. So if I have an image in the visible region, that is from violet to red, then we will observe that presence of pollutants or contaminants tends to reduce reflection when we are observing snow features. Now here, all these features, land cover features common land cover features like vegetation, soil, snow, clouds, etc., that water that we had seen, we had discussed previously, have been put together in one spectral reflectance curve so that you can observe each of them and compare them, right? Now, if you see individual bands or channels, when they are observed individually, they will be seen as black and white or grayscale images. Then you see in different regions of the spectrum, different features are distinguishable. In some bands, a particular feature is better seen, right? Like here you see vegetation and water, there is a sharp contrast between the vegetation and water boundary. Then if I choose the true color composite, that is if I visualize the red through the red wavelength through the red channel, the green through the green, the blue through the blue, then I will see true color or natural color composite, and will be visualizing features exactly in the same colors as they are actually seen on the terrain. A false color composite tends to change this actual colors, and we will then see things in colors different from what they actually are on the ground. This is done so that to overcome the limitation of the hardware for display and to be able to visualize wavelengths which give us crucial information about the object of interest. This is a false color composite. This is the standard false color composite, where the vegetation features are seen in red, yes, sand, etc., or built-up features are seen in the cyan tone. Water is seen. Now here you see deep water is seen in dark. If you compare here, this is shallow water. This is giving us some amount of reflectance, so this is seen in different shade. As we go deeper, it changes to a darker shade. And the bright feature is sand, dry sand. Vegetation is all red. Similarly here, if you see, all the red, this is again a standard false color composite. So we see water features, dark because the infrared band has been used here, the linear shapes of features, yes, river channels with water, the dry riverbed, built-up areas, orchards, yes, hilly terrain. Now you can observe this table. Now we come to the next section, that is visual image interpretation. Now image interpretation or extraction of information can be done by two methods, that is the visual or manual method and the digital method. So the digital image processing section will be dealt with separately later on in the module. Today we will be talking about visual methods of interpretation. Now this can be done using a hard copy image or photograph and then marking out the features on it manually, or visually interpreting details by displaying a digital image on screen. So I display my image on screen and then visually or manually do the interpretation or labeling. Okay? Now, there are a few points that we learned in the previous discussion to keep in mind while doing this. We need to remember that the image is a pictorial representation of the landscape that we are trying to analyze. Patterns here on the image will indicate types of objects and their physical, biological, or cultural relationships. Then this is very important. Similar objects under similar conditions will reflect similarly. So like two species of trees, buildings, etc., because they are similar features, they will reflect similarly, right? Now, and the interpretation on the image is done of the physical nature of the object. As soon as the physical conditions of the object changes, the manifestation of its properties in terms of spectral signatures on the image also change. So it is this that the interpreter has to extract or interpret. Right? So the factors that will govern interpretability would be the training and experience of the interpreter, what object or phenomena we are trying to study, quality of the input data, that is the photographs and images, the equipment and method of interpretation, and what a priori information in terms of interpretation, keys, etc., that we have at hand. And if we have any prior knowledge of the area, this is also going to be very, very useful. So the activities of image interpretation usually are: first is detection, recognition, analysis, deduction, classification, idealization, and convergence of evidence. Now, depending upon the applications, we choose optimum kind of data. The data characteristics which would help us could be spectral information, or whether we need temporal data, or whether more details are required, then we would go for more higher spatial resolution, finer spatial resolution data. Then this is another small question for you to answer later on about the spectral reflectance curve. You can get back to it once we finish. Then comes the most important part, that what are the elements of image interpretation? What are the clues that we get on the image, through the image, and how we use these to assign labels or classes to pixels visually? So there are certain elements, or visual elements as we call them, which are tone, shape, size, pattern, texture, shadow, and association. So we will quickly look at each of these and how these are going to help us. Now, tone refers to the relative brightness or color of objects in the image, which means that excuse me, if you see here, this is bright tone, a bright shade that we see here. As soon as this tone changes into another tone, we see a boundary. Right? Now, if we are able to distinguish this boundary for all features, this boundary would indicate boundaries of change in feature or physical condition. So it is a primary or fundamental element for distinguishing different targets or features on the image. Shape refers to the general form, structure, or outline of individual objects. This can give you very distinctive clues for interpretation. So certain shapes are always associated with certain features, like linear shapes are associated with roads, railway lines. Yes, agriculture fields are usually squares or rectangles. Yes. Then this elliptical shape here indicates that it could be an athletic field. Size of objects on images is a function of scale. So when we are talking about size of object on the image, we need to connect it to its spatial resolution, because what will happen is that the same object, when viewed at different spatial resolutions on the image, it will appear in different sizes depending upon what spatial resolution we have chosen. Then comes pattern. Pattern refers to whether objects are arranged in uh, some kind of recognizable repetition, right? So is there an orderly repetition of similar tones or textures or not, right? So whether objects are spatially arranged uh, or not. So for example, if I compare orchards and forest, both feature consist of trees or vegetation, but forests being natural entities will not follow any pattern. So different species of trees will grow randomly. However, since orchards are man-made and planted in rows, when we look at it from a vertical perspective on the image, we will be able to decipher this pattern. So evenly spaced trees or urban streets in a planned housing colony, etc., will translate into a pattern on the image. So these will help us in distinguish between these features, even though other elements of interpretation would be similar. For example, if tone is similar in orchard and forest feature, the pattern will give us a clue to be able to distinguish this. Then the next element is texture, and this refers to the arrangement and frequency of tonal variation in particular regions or areas of the image. Now, this means that whether tone changes, what the observer needs to see is whether tone changes frequently in the region or not. So if you see this image, you will be immediately able to separate it into two textures. That is, this homogeneous region where tones don't change very frequently. Yes, this gives us a visual texture of smoothness. So you can say it's a smooth texture, homogeneous region. Yes, no very frequent change of tone. Then, if you see, observe here, there are frequent changes of tone very quickly, very bright, dark, very dark, and so on. So if you see, you can easily draw a boundary between these two textures. So this part where tones change frequently, visually it gives us an appearance of rough texture, right? So when gray levels change abruptly in a small area, we will see rough textures, whereas smooth textures will have very little tonal variation over large areas, so homogeneous features. Like grasslands and large area of trees. Then we come to shadow. Shadows are usually considered as noise or occlusion because they tend to restrict the interpreter's ability to be able to see things clearly on the image. However, at times they may provide us an idea of the profile and relative height of the feature, and this could make identification easier. Right? So as you see here, if you see the shadow, even if you don't have a stereoscopic image, we can assess that because it's casting a shadow, this might be at a higher level than the surrounding road. So it could be a flyover, etc. Then comes association, and this takes into account, this is the relational characteristic, and this takes into account the relationship between other recognizable features or objects in the proximity or in nearness to the target of interest. So certain features are always associated with certain other features. For example, commercial properties may be associated with their proximity to major transportation routes. Residential areas would mostly be associated with features like schools or playgrounds or parking areas and so on and so forth. Right? This is just a comparison of the true color and the false color. So you see, true color here, all the vegetation features are seen in green. In the standard false color composite, they are seen in shades of red. Texture is also varying. You see, smooth texture, rough texture. Cyan tones indicate built-up areas. Here they are seen in their true colors. Okay. Another small query for you to attempt later. Now we will quickly go through a few examples of images so that you get a fair idea of what kind of data is available and at what details in terms of spatial, spectral, temporal resolution can you see and what kind of features or applications you can use these images for. So these are all fairly coarse, medium to coarse spatial resolution images. Here you see water body, dark, near the coast, inland water bodies, red is vegetation. Then here again it is arid sort of with a water body with the river has a the channel partly contains water, and in some portions it is dry, lot of sand because the cyan tone indicates it that. Now this image is of the middle infrared region, and the middle infrared region is the thermal region, thermal infrared region, wherein you can study temperature changes. So temperature related interpretations can be done. So this is a volcano. Red is vegetation. The center yellow-orange portion that is seen here is the burning lava inside the crater. And this is the bare slopes with some built-up areas at the base. Then you see these circular features which indicate sprinkler irrigation systems. These are characteristics of features of areas where you have an arid desert kind of climate. So here you see all the cyan tone indicates sand. The circular features, which are agricultural fields, are in different stages of growth with different moisture content. So if you see here, this is half cultivated and half lying fallow. It is dark, so it indicates that there is high moisture content. Okay. The other ones which are bright have low moisture content. Similarly here, suspended material, sand near the coast. As you go in deeper into the sea, it becomes darker. So depth of water will make on the signature will be, as depth increases, the signature on the image will be dark for water. And it indicates that we are using the infrared band. Now, when you come here near the coast, you see a lot of suspended material. This is a delta. It can be interpreted if we had a larger portion of the image. Many rivers are converging here and dumping their load into the sea. So a lot of suspended material. The darker portion indicates moisture content. So there must have been an ingress of the tide, and the rest of the vegetation is bright. Right? So the tide must have come only up till here. Here, very rocky, mountainous terrain with very little vegetation. These are urban areas, examples of urban areas. So you see lots of built-up features, roads, buildings. This is an airstrip. If you are able to notice it here, or maybe in the digital image, you will be able to see it. This is a stadium with spectator seats, railway lines, maybe a golf course here, several buildings, and linear features which correspond to roads. We also see several water bodies in here of different shapes, like tanks, etc. Similarly here, agriculture fields in different stages of growth. The ones that are bright are fallow. The red ones indicate, or the pink ones indicate there is cultivation happening here. Again, the pink tone and the bright red tone indicate that either the crop type is different or they are at a different stage of growth. Then this is a water body. Another water body. This, because it has a very definite shape, could be a man-made water body. So this is the way in which the interpreter needs to look at these images, decipher the clues that it provides, and extract information. Roughness, if you see here, in terms of waves, the water surface is rough, suspended material near the coast, beach sand, which is very bright, right? Then a very high spatial resolution image, 70 centimeter pixel size. So industrial area, each building can be seen in detail. These are the chimneys with the smoke coming out, storage sheds, chemical tanks. Then temporal variation in the image. Now, if you see the top image, oops, sorry. Yes, you see that the building here is intact. Now, here we see the portion of the building that has been damaged. So this portion of the building has been damaged. So it is September 7th and this is September 12th. So over this period of time, the building has been damaged. So if we compare the two dates, we will be able to see what changes have occurred. In this image, you can also see roads. It's an institutional building, parking lots, etc., and several other features, trees and grassland, parks, and so on. Now here, when you see agriculture fields, different textures in the orchards, also in the fields. So this is plowed field. These are fields which have some amount of vegetation. Now on the boundaries of the field, if you are able to see these features, these are windmills. Now the feature as such is not distinguishable. However, when you look at the shadow, then you are able to get an idea of the three-pronged fan of the windmill. Then there are other features, sand dunes. These are longitudinal sand dunes. These are barkhans, ridges. Now, these are three features which give you similar reflectance. So white, bright features. But these are salt pans, salt incrustations, and salt is mined in this area. This is glacier, so snow features, and these are clouds. So all three of them give you the same kind of reflectance, similar reflectance, but other characteristics help us distinguish between them as being different entities. Urban features. So if you see here, this is a brick kiln. There is a chimney. Its shadow can be observed. Right? The soil has been excavated here, and this is the stacked area where the bricks have been baked and stacked. Here it is a very densely populated area. Here it is not so densely populated, but you can see high-rise buildings with long shadows. This is again an urban area. It appears to be a railway station with flyover, the railway track going under the road. And this is again a stadium with spectator seats and athletic field and so on and so forth. So different types of urban features can be observed here. Again, very high spatial resolution data, so you can see individual vehicles, markings on the roads, even the air conditioning units and water storage tanks on the roofs. Very high-rise building. Yes. Similarly, this is an industrial setup. Then again, this is a small interpretational exercise for you to do on your own. We probably won't have time to do it here. You can attempt it when we share the presentation with you. Then I'll wind up with a small comparison between the manual versus the digital methods. Since you haven't studied the digital method yet, it will become more understandable when you finish that portion also and then come back to read this again. So the manual interpretation and analysis goes back to the early beginnings of remote sensing and began with aerial photo interpretation. Digital image analysis is more recent. Manual or visual interpretation requires little, if any, specialized equipment. It is only the ability or the expertise of the interpreter and the quality of the data. Digital analysis requires specialized and often very expensive equipment. Manual interpretation is often limited to analyzing only single channels of data or a single image. That is, the band combination is fixed. That is in case we are using an analog printout of the photograph. If I am displaying a digital image on screen, I can keep changing my band combinations and doing the interpretation. However, the computer environment or the digital environment is more amenable to handling complex images of several or many channels that are available from several dates and so on. Now, manual interpretation is a subjective process, meaning that the results may vary a little with different interpreters. Digital analysis is based on, because it is based on manipulation of digital numbers, it is more objective and therefore it results in more consistent results. But this is not to say that digital analysis always gives us correct, accurate results. Determining the accuracy and the validation of the results from digital processing is difficult, and we usually see that the reference data is generated by visual interpretation. So it is important to stress here that visual and digital analysis of the remote sensing images is not a mutually exclusive task. So in most cases, a mix of both methods is usually employed when analyzing the images, and the decision of the utility and relevance of the information that we have extracted or interpreted with the analysis process is made by human interpreters. Thank you very much. With this, we come to the end of the discussion. We will take a 5-minute break and then we will get back to the interactive session.